Non-community persons not permitted to speak at open forum, but they can submit written statements to the school committee. And if you are speaking after giving your name and address, you may make a presentation of no more than 4 minutes to the school committee, and an individual may not exchange their time or yield to others. Interested parties may also submit written statements. At this time, is there anybody interested in speaking at the open forum? Please do so. Name and address. Thank you.
Is this thing? Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Hurley. Good evening. I live at 35 Lennox Street in beautiful Howes Neck. Oh, that's a little easier. I'm a proud graduate of QPS. I have 3 wonderful children in QPS, and I'm the health interventionist at North Quincy High School. As a member of the QEA, I'm here on behalf of my colleagues to express our optimism that the committee's recent decision to return to the bargaining table indicates that we will be able to come to terms on mutually agreeable contract settlement soon, particularly given the significant movement made by our team and our last set of proposals. I know we are all eager to return our full focus as a district to the reason we are all here, educating our Quincy students. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful night.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jackie Principe. I live at 166 Clinton Road in Weymouth, and I am the 8th grade social studies teacher at Point Webster Middle School. As a member of the QEA, I am here on behalf of my colleagues to thank the school committee for returning to the table with our bargaining team. As QEA members, we are hopeful that the committee will recognize the significant movement made by our team in our last set of proposals, and we are optimistic that we will be able to reach a settlement soon. We look forward to the outcome of our next bargaining session. Thank you all.
Evening. My name is Andrea Curtin. I live at 180 Samoset Avenue. I am a veteran second grade teacher at Squantum School, where I have been fortunate enough to spend my entire teaching career. My children have been in Quincy Public Schools since kindergarten, now in 8th grade and junior year. As a member of the QEA, I am here on behalf of my colleagues to express that we are heartened to learn that there is a new bargaining date scheduled for later this month. The membership is hopeful that the movement made by our team will allow a contract agreement to be reached in short order. We therefore respectfully ask that you carefully consider the QEA's proposals so that we can all move forward for our students, families, and the Quincy community. Thank you.
Anybody else for open forum? Last call, open forum? Okay, seeing none, I'll close that part of the meeting. Superintendent, your report, please.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. First on my report is the QPS student recognitions. Congratulations to Quincy High School senior Christiana Nguyen, who was recently accepted into the prestigious National Association for Music Education at All Eastern Treble Chorus. Christiana will join high school music students from 12 other eastern states in Rochester, New York in April to rehearse and perform at the annual All Eastern concert. So congratulations again to Christiana Nguyen, a great accomplishment. Next is the winter assessment update. With the return to school on January 3rd, Quincy Public School students are busy with winter administration of assessments. Access testing for English learners is underway with 1,658 students in grades K to 12 scheduled to be assessed for reading, speaking, listening, and writing between January 9th and February 10th. The winter map testing is also underway for approximately 4,300 students in grades 2 through 8 for English language arts and mathematics, and grades 4 through 8 for science. And this will be completed in early February. 1,400 students in kindergarten through grade 2 will also have the winter administration of the Amplify M class early and foundational literacy screening this month as well. And our high school students are busy with course-based projects and assessments as the second term ends on January 27th. Next is the kindergarten registration for the 2023-2024 school year. Believe it or not, it's already underway. With the online link for families to pre-register, it's posted on the Quincy Public Schools website, as well as our social media. Pre-registered families will be contacted by school secretaries and central registration personnel beginning on February 6th to schedule registration appointments. 180 families have already pre-registered as we begin the process of welcoming the QPS class of 2036. Additional items, congratulations to North Quincy High School boys basketball coach Kevin Barrett with last Friday's win against Pembroke High School. Kevin became the winningest coach in North Quincy High School basketball history with 179 wins over 17 seasons. The team is 6-2 so far this season, and we wish them the best of luck with each win adding to Coach Barrett's record. So congratulations to Coach Barrett. With that, that would end my superintendent's report.
Any comments, questions from the committee? All right, going to old business. Item 4, establishing a policy in section 9.15, student electronic device policy. This is up for a vote tonight, if you wish. I go to Mr. Bergoli.
Quincy Public Schools student personal electronic device policy. We had this sent out to parents, and I was wondering, Superintendent, if we had any feedback and what the result of the feedback was.
Yes, we did. With regard to the high school, high school language, the feedback was very positive. However, we did have some feedback from our middle school principals who wished to maintain the current policy and practice that they have, that which is not having any cell phones on students within the classroom or within the school. In other words, the cell phones are kept in the lockers. So that was some of the feedback we got, a very strong feedback we got from the middle school principals, so that there would be an exception made so that, middle school and elementary students would not have access to cell phones during the day.
Oh, Ms. Lebo.
So, thank you for saying that, because I've heard the same thing from parents, that there is cell phone use in the bathrooms, and that kids who are going, in the middle schools, and kids who are going to the bathroom are feeling a little intimidated by it, by seeing the phones there. So I have heard that from more than one parent, about the kids who are using their cell phone in the middle school, with their cell phone use in the bathroom. So, it's a concern with the kids and the parents, so if the principals are concerned about it, then I am too. All those kids have lockers.
Yes.
Well, I wonder if we should consider,
So the policy that you have in front of you has a sentence from middle and elementary school added in bold, right under the numbered list that reflects the feedback that we got.
I see it.
So there's no need for an amendment.
And that is reflective of the current practice, that the principals are enforcing no cell phones at the middle school level, as well as elementary.
Well, I need to enforce it a little better.
Okay.
This will help.
This will help, right?
Anybody else? Anybody else? No? Entertain a motion if you want.
I can't
I
make a
make-
motion.
Can I make a motion?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we accept the policy as written.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Cahill. Any discussion?
On the motion?
Mr. Guttrow?
Yeah, I'm going to vote no on the motion. First of all, I support everything middle school and elementary school students, principals have said with respect to it. I paid close attention to a lot of the feedback that we got because we did the survey. We had all principals from every school before us, and not one of them flagged the issue of cell phones to us when they did their school improvement plans. Didn't mention it as a significant or consequential issue, didn't show up in any of the school improvement plans. I think that the principals have administered policies that are seemingly effective. I'm also concerned about two things. One, a number that, these are at the high school level. A number of the high school teachers have indicated that they would like some discretion to use the cell phone as a teaching tool in class if they desired. I don't think our policy gives any wiggle room for that. And two, I'm concerned that there's not enough clarity to ensure that teachers aren't caught in the middle of it, even though it says the device will be returned to the student at the end of the day. I know that we had extensive discussion about this in policy committee. We've talked about it before, but I just wanted to say for the audience, that's why I'm casting my vote that way.
Okay, any further discussion? Mrs. Lebo?
I just want to say that I've heard from several high school teachers that they feel like they have their school back at both high schools this year because the policy is in place. So this is communication directly with teachers at citywide events. So, and not only did the principals tell us that they wanted this, but I personally have heard from lots of people that I know that they really want this policy in place. And that things have changed for the better in their buildings since the policy has been there. And kids have told me that too, actually.
Okay,
This also gives consistency across the district. So one school is not doing one thing and another school is not doing a different thing. So I think it's something that we should give a positive approval to.
Superintendent?
Mr. Begoli?
Yes.
Mrs. Cahill?
Yes.
Mr. Gattro?
No,
Mrs. Hubley? Mrs. Lebo?
Yes,
Mr. Santoro?
Yes.
Mayor Koch?
Yes.
Thank you all.
Okay, item 5, new business, spring 2022 vocal data analysis. Superintendent Mulvey for Ms. Perkins, Ms. Roy, and Mr. Tierney.
Thank you. I just want to welcome our team, Assistant Superintendent Perkins, Senior Director Roy, and our data director, Mr. Tierney. Welcome. And with that, I will hand the presentation over to Mrs. Perkins. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Thank you so much for having us here tonight to review the Views of Climate and Learning survey that occurred in the spring of 2022. So before we begin, I just would like to just share a little bit of background in terms of what has been happening with the state on the vocal survey. So just to refresh your memories, the vocal survey is an annual voluntary survey that is administered to grade 4, 5, 8, and 10th grade students upon completing their MCAS assessment. I just want to remind the committee that it's a snapshot in time and should not be used in isolation. Some of the questions that the students are presented with are easier to agree with than others, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Students choose from mostly true, always true, sometimes true, and never true in their responses, and we'll discuss that a little further. So some of those questions are easier to agree with than others, but the percent response data does not take that into account and treats them as if they are all the same difficulty level. So just as an example of this, on the item that involves fostering a climate that encourages students to intervene when they see someone being teased, has been shown to be much harder to engender than encouraging a teacher to intervene if told about a student being bullied. Yet those two items are rated the same. So I just also want to point out, and then we'll get into the presentation, that in general across the state, students have reported that they experience positive school climates, and that most of the scores that we'll talk about, and we'll talk about what this means, fall between a state average of 35 to 75 on the index scores. And another thing you will notice tonight, which is reflective of the state, is that students in grades 4 and 5 reported more positive school climates than students in grades 8 and 10. Why is this not going? There we go. So just to go over what we'll be discussing tonight, so we're just going to talk very quickly about the history of the vocal survey, because we have not presented this to you in a great amount of detail in quite a long time. We will provide an overview of the vocal survey. We'll talk about the different dimensions. So there are 3 different dimensions that comprise the vocal survey. They are engagement, safety, and environment. And within each of those dimensions, there are subcomponents, and those include cultural and linguistic competency, relationship, and participation. And under safety, it is emotional safety, physical safety, bullying, and cyberbullying. And under environment, it's instructional, mental health, and discipline. So just to refresh your memory in terms of a little bit about the history of the vocal survey. So the vocal survey is based on the conceptual framework of the U.S. Department of Education school climate surveys. The vocal survey also, you should note that the vocal survey also meets the requirements included in the Massachusetts Act relative to bullying. It is a survey that was developed based on those frameworks, and it is given annually. As I mentioned earlier, it's given to students in grades 4, 5, 8, and 10, and they participate in the survey at the end of the MCAS administration. It was first administered in Quincy Public Schools online in the spring of 2019 at the conclusion of grade 4 and grade 10 after the math MCAS. It's now administered in grades 4 and 10. They completed at the end of the mathematics MCAS, similar to in 2019, and grades 5 and 8 completed after the science, technology, and engineering test. So as I mentioned, there are multiple domains in the vocal survey. And so under engagement, I just wanted to mention the 3 areas that fall under this domain, under this section. So cultural competency is the extent to which students and adults feel value diversity, manage dynamics of differences, and avoid stereotypes. It also includes relationships, and that is the extent students feel there is a social connection and respect between staff and teachers and students, and between students and their peers. And participation is the extent students feel engaged intellectually, emotionally, and behaviorally in the classroom, and the extent that students or their parents are engaged in school life. Under the climate measure of safety, it starts with emotional safety, the extent students feel a bond to the school, and the extent adults support the emotional needs of students. Physical safety, the extent that students feel physically safe within their school environment. And bullying and cyberbullying, the extent that students report different types of bullying behaviors occurring in the school, and the extent that school staff and students try to counteract bullying. And finally, there is the environment section, which includes the instructional environment, and that is the extent that students feel the instructional environment is collaborative, relevant, challenging, and supportive of their learning. The mental health environment of the school, which is the extent that students have access to support systems that effectively support their social, emotional, and mental health well-being. And the discipline environment, and that's the extent that discipline is fair, applied consistently and evenly, and a shared responsibility among staff, teachers, and students. Within each of these areas, the vocal survey does highlight 3 of these categories as subcategories. So you will see in our presentation that under engagement, there is a separate score for participation. There is also a separate score for bullying and cyberbullying under safety. And there is a separate score for instructional environment under the environment category. And we'll talk about that as we move forward. So next, you see the number of items for each dimension and the topic within each grade level survey. So depending on the grade level, there are a total of 46 or 48 questions that are administered to the students. You can see how they're broken down. So for instance, in grade 4, there are 4 questions that address cultural competency. You'll see that the dimensions that I talked about, participation, bullying, cyberbullying, and instructional, all have a higher number of questions within the vocal survey. So next, we are looking at the participation of the vocal survey compared to the state. So similar to our MCAS participation, we have a very high participation rate. So in grades 4, 5, and 8, our participation was excellent. In grade 10, it was a little less. There was 76%. I do want to just point out that even though it was 76% participation, we still had 528 high school students take the vocal survey. And there was about 293 at Quincy High and 275 at North Quincy High. And when we looked into why this was a little bit lower, it is a voluntary survey, and it is given at the end of the mathematics test in the spring at the end of the year, and the students can certainly just click through it. So, it's their choice whether or not they take it. We're not able to force them to do it or stand over them. So if they choose to participate, don't participate, then that's a choice that they make. So just to talk about how the scores are broken down. So the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education developed 7 index scores. They're scaled scores, as I have mentioned, for schools and districts. So what we'll talk about tonight, you'll see an overall climate score. You'll also see an index score for the engagement dimension. There is also an index score for safety. There's an index score for environment. There's an index score, as I mentioned, for participation, bullying, and in the instructional environment. So the index scores range from 1 to 99, and in all cases, the higher the index score, it indicates a more favorable environment. These index scores are anchored to the 2018 scale, which, as I mentioned earlier, is when this survey was developed, and the scale has a mean of 50. So DZ recommends that educators focus on patterns of index scores and differences that replicate across years. The replication of the results across years supports the interpretation that a meaningful difference exists or has occurred. So these scores, the index score is a composite measure that aggregates the individual student item responses from the previously discussed climate dimensions. And these index scores give us a holistic district and school view on where our strengths and weaknesses are and where we need to focus our attention. And it also allows us to be able to monitor climate and compare climate scores over time. So as I mentioned, the higher the score, the more favorable the school climate. And so you can see that this is how they break it down. So 30 and below is considered least favorable, 31 to 50 somewhat favorable, 51 to 70 is favorable, and above 70 is most favorable. So those are the index scores. And we're taking the time to go through these because I don't believe that we've actually ever presented it in this way to the committee before. So we are, presenting it. We've looked at the item responses, but this is the first time we've really kind of dug in as a group with the overall index scores. So in terms of our overall school climate, you can see that, the index scores, as I mentioned, obviously the higher the index score, the more favorable the score. So we, in grades 4 and 5, we have very strong climate scores. The scores do dip in grade 8 and grade 10. I will say we follow the state pattern, so you can see that obviously in grades 4 and 5, even across the state, there are higher scores, higher overall climate scores than students in grades 8 and 10. And I do just want to point out a couple of interesting things that have occurred at the state level in terms of the overall climate score. So in grade 8, the statewide overall climate score declined from the pre-pandemic levels, dropping from a score of 46 in 2018 to a score of 43 in 2022. And it has remained in that drop. And it's also very interesting to note, I found this fact pretty interesting when I was reading it, that in the upper grades across the state, most schools' average score fell within the somewhat favorable category, with no schools categorized as most favorable. That's across the entire state. Not one middle school or high school was categorized as most favorable, and only a tenth of the schools in the upper grades were categorized as favorable. So that was a kind of an interesting fact for us. And so now I will pass it over to Chris, who will talk about engagement.
Thank you, Mrs. Perkins. Good evening. We'll be taking you through the 3 vocal dimensions, starting with engagement. As you saw in the previous slides, engagement is composed of 3 topics: cultural competence, participation, and relationships. We'll compare ourselves to the state, highlight our strengths, and focus in on areas we'd like to improve. Here you can see our engagement climate scores for grades 4, 5, 8, and 10 are similar to the state average. We're seeing a more favorable engagement climate in grades 4 and 5, and grades 8 and 10, though not being as strong, are in line with the state. We would like to see those numbers rise, and we'll begin to take a closer look at those item areas. The topic of participation, which measures the extent to which students feel engaged in the classroom and parents or guardians are connected to school life, is given its own composite index score. Our scores are again comparable to the state average, with only 1 to 2 point difference when comparing individual grades. This shows a similar pattern of scores when compared to the overall engagement. With those index scores in mind, we drilled down on item responses that contribute to those composite scores and pulled a few item highlights that we wanted to share. Overall, we were pleased to see that the overwhelming majority of our students feel cared for, respected, and accepted by teachers and staff in their schools, with teachers fostering a respectful school environment and making themselves available for students in need. With the positive areas also comes areas in which we would like to see growth. Regarding cultural competence, looking for books that best represent our student population is an ongoing initiative with classroom teachers, librarians, and PTOs. We will continue to monitor and curate the reading options for our students for the foreseeable future. Bridget Vaughn has done extensive work with the GLEAM grant, and we look forward to seeing if there's a shift in student feelings towards the new materials. Within participation, as you may have seen in the individual item responses on the school improvement plans, keeping students engaged and active in their classrooms will need to be a main focus going forward. We hope to accomplish this by empowering students to take on a more active role in their classroom with independent or group projects and students' discussions that stimulate learning. And finally, continuing to promote healthy and respectful relationships between students will remain a key focus area at all grade levels through the implementation of Open Parachute and other resources like our partnership with Dove. Moving on to safety climate, which includes the topics of emotional safety, physical safety, and bullying or cyberbullying. As we saw in the previous dimension, we remain comparable to the state in all grades. We're seeing a similar pattern with a strong showing from grades 4 and 5, with a slight dip in grade 8 and 10. And similar to participation from the engagement domain, bullying receives a standalone index score. Again, it mirrors the overall safety index score and remains similar to the state. With the safety and well-being of our students being the top priority, we were happy to see that the vast majority of our 4th and 5th grade students feel safe and happy in their schools, with teachers being available to assist students who may come to class upset and everyone working together to stop bullying. Students have a sense of belonging to their school community, and having peers that they can rely on was another bright spot that we wanted to highlight. We'd like to attribute this to the many clubs that students are encouraged to participate in. Within safety, there are definitely a few areas that we'd like to see an improvement. Obviously, no student should ever be hit or shoved, and we continue to teach conflict resolution to our students in an effort to bring that percentage to as close to 0 as possible. The same goes for bullying and name-calling, in which Mrs. Papil and Mrs. Perkins will be presenting on the district's intervention and prevention plan and monitoring procedures at an upcoming meeting. In the area of physical safety, we would like to see this number be close to 0 as well, and continue to work to build the student skills so that they have respect for each other in school property and take pride in their school community.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I'll take it from here. So similar to the other 2 dimensions that Chris spoke about, the environment dimension consists of 3 topics or domains: instructional, mental health, and discipline. And just, Erin had already mentioned this, but The items related to mental health and environment focus on a student's perception of the support for their social, emotional, and mental health well-being, and the extent students perceive that they have access to these supports. Items related to the discipline environment focus on school discipline and the extent that, or the extent to which students perceive discipline to be fair and consistent, and if staff, teachers, and students have a shared responsibility in the overall culture and climate and rules of the building. I'll talk a little bit more about the instructional environment when we get to slide 21. Here are our overall index scores for the environment climate dimension and our comparison to the state. Once again, we're seeing scores for a favorable environment in grades 4 and 5, and an overall rating of somewhat favorable for grades 8 and 10. Although not as strong as the upper grades, we do trend with the state results. Both at the district and the secondary level, we'd like to see these rating scores rise, and I'll share some specific items with you to see how students at each level are perceiving the environmental climate. The state has pulled out this particular topic, instructional climate, as a focus area for the environmental dimension. The instructional climate topic measures the extent to which students feel the instructional environment is collaborative, relevant, challenging, and supportive. For this specific topic, the general rating aligns with the overall index score for the environmental climate, with elementary level students perceiving a higher favorability to their instructional environment and secondary students scoring in the somewhat favorable range. You'll see some specific examples over the next 2 slides. As far as strengths go for the environmental climate at our schools, we're happy to see so many students giving certain indicators such favorable ratings, such as teachers setting high expectations and helping students succeed, or supporting them with difficult or challenging schoolwork. There's a positive trend throughout this dimension that teachers take pride in their students and offer support and praise when an assignment needs work. At the younger levels, over 90% of students rated school rules most favorably when asked if school rules were fair. And at the middle level, 92% of students rated their teachers most favorably in expressing a belief in their abilities to learn and succeed. At the high school level, grade 10 students rated themselves most favorably in helping each other learn in class. Areas in need of reflection and collective strategizing include: how can all stakeholders help reduce the pressure students feel to perform well? How can we safely and proactively provide students opportunities to have input on school rules or policies, or discipline procedures? And from a curriculum perspective, how can we create a better balance between the current frameworks and student learning outcomes for coursework with relevant contemporary topics that are high interest for student learning? We'd like to take one more look at this vocal climate data. And on this slide, we have the overall district index scores. So this is a combination of all 4 of those grade levels by each of the 3 dimensions. Focusing on the blue bars, you'll see that overall, our students are rating the items in each dimension as favorable, which requires an index score between 51 and 70. Looking at the red bar, you can see that Quincy students in general align with the outcomes across the state. Of course, we'll continue to collaborate and work together and strategize so that we can understand where there are rooms to improve and what's the best course of action depending on the level or the specific school in terms of their individual school data. The next 3 slides show our overall district subgroup data disaggregated by each of the dimensions. Here we have the engagement dimension, which focuses on relationships, participation, and cultural competence. Our district subgroups by race are identified along the horizontal axis, and the overall index score is shown vertically. The blue bars represent Quincy Public Schools, and the red bars the state. Our subgroup index ratings mirror our district-wide data for all students in this dimension. Here we have the safety data dimension, which focuses on emotional, physical, well-being, and in-person or cyberbullying. These subgroup index ratings trend in the somewhat favorable and favorable rating categories, depending on the level. Reminder that this data reflects an overall district index score and combines all 4 of those grade levels, 4th, 5th, 8th, and 10th graders, puts all that data together. Therefore, we see overall lower favorable ratings because the upper grades scored most of these items as somewhat favorable in this safety dimension. Here we have the environment climate dimension, which focuses on instruction and support, mental health and well-being, and discipline. These subgroup index ratings trend in the favorable rating categories, with the exception of our other category. In summary, in terms of the views of this climate and learning vocal survey, this is how we take a look and summarize this data. We've done with our principals. You know, you heard some of that, you heard a lot of that in their SIP presentations. And we look at it at the program and the district level. And so we have come up with a number of things that we want to highlight and we feel are promoting these favorable ratings and the outcomes. We also want to share that the Department of Education provides written guidance as well as virtual webinars around the Climate and Learning Survey. And while vocal data provides an important perspective when evaluating school climate, districts are encouraged not to use this data singularly as a standalone. Research has shown that a positive school climate is associated with high student social emotional skills, higher student attendance, lower chronic absences, lower in-school and out-of-school suspensions, lower dropout rates, a strong curriculum, and high expectations for learning. When combined with other data such as discipline, attendance, and graduation rates, vocal data can inform and empower districts and schools with information not previously available to support school programs, initiatives, and improvements throughout the district. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll entertain any questions.
Questions from the committee? Mr. Guttrow?
Thank you for the presentation. I have 4 questions. One is broad, the other is one in each category. So did you do a breakdown by each school? And if so, if there were any anomalies in any schools, can you just walk us through the anomalies on either end of the spectrum?
The vocal data does come broken down by schools. We don't actually have to do it. It does it for us. But, and so I think that what we saw, and I mean, Maddie and Chris can jump in certainly, but I think that what we saw is definitely what the state saw, that our elementary schools tended to have higher climate ratings than the middle school and the high school. And I think, like the grade 8 scores, I think were definitely lower than we'd like to see. They were in line with the state, but we would like to see those scores be higher. We definitely saw, and as I said, the whole state saw this, a drop in the safety dimension. And I think that that is definitely reflective of, the current climate across the state. But so I would say that those were the things that we noticed, was that the older the students got, the lower the favorability scores, and that there was, especially more so in the upper grades than the lower grades, there was a drop in the safety dimension. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And Mr. Guttrow, don't expect to remember this, but in the appendix of the SIPs, they do have their individual school data, and we have that as well. We can send out as PDFs. And the principals at differing levels spoke to their data. Some even included it in one of their social, maybe in their social emotional goal.
Yeah, no, I remember during the SIPs that several of the principals talked through it. I was just wondering if you saw any anomalies in any specific school that's not consistent with the district data, where you said we need to do something in this specific category around that school.
No, nothing jumped out at me necessarily. I would say sometimes in the questions, maybe, like in the individual, because you have your index scores, but then you also have individual question items. And I think there were a couple of schools that might have had lower individual questions than other schools did, or kind of different responses in terms of the question responses, the individual question responses. And I would say, you know, I think that the thing that I would say that I noticed in particular, like from a district perspective, and I think it's a credit to our staff, to our teachers, to our principals, that really the majority of the questions that had to do with anything to do with staff, you know, staff make me feel safe. I feel comfortable, you know, I can, the staff intervene if someone's being bullied, you know, something like that. Those were all very positive scores, and for the most part. And where we saw lower items were in things like anything to do with students, you know, students
Student autonomy.
intervene, you know, if they see someone upset that they don't know, they intervene. You know, students try to stop bullying, like those kinds of questions, I think were lower than we would have liked to see. They were about like half and half, you know, kind of split down the middle. And so, and like I said, in particular in the older grades. And so I think that, you know, that's an area, I mean, I think that's a very hard skill, you know, and I mentioned this at the beginning, when you're, you know, it's one thing, you know, we're adults, we know how to, you know, go up and handle a situation or handle a conflict, hopefully, you know, when it's happening. But, you know, kids, that skill takes time, you know, and so I think to intervene or to be comfortable intervening when you don't know what's going on, you see a child that's upset, or you see a person in your grade or in a different grade in the high school that's upset, I think to expect a student to go over and try to solve the problem is asking a lot. You know, and I think that we're working on those skills with our kids every day, and our staff are working on those skills with our kids every day. But what I really found, I thought was inspiring, was that anything that had to do, and again, you know, there might, you know, pretty much anything that had to do with staff were higher scores. They were good. They were really good.
And now I'll go through the categories and I'll consolidate. So on the safety survey, responses to seeing a fight, bullying, being punched or shoved, or seeing somebody steal or damage property. My question is, Emily and I have talked about the desire to get a breakdown of incidences. What are all the categories of incidences that are reported, and see it by school and talk it through. Has anybody done a correlation of actual incidences with the perceptions in the vocal survey for those categories?
We have not done that, no. We certainly can do that. And I will say, I know Christopher mentioned it, but we are going to be putting together a bullying presentation for an upcoming meeting. So we do have, Mrs. Papil has been working on an updated bullying prevention and intervention plan, which is required by the state. And so that is currently posted on the Quincy Public Schools website for public comment, and I think that closes the 13th. So we're currently collecting feedback on that plan. Then we will take a look at that feedback, incorporate, you know, some of it is laws and regulations, and we cannot change those, but we'll certainly incorporate the feedback, you know, that parents or stakeholders give us as much as we possibly can, and then the final plan will be posted. But we've also had professional development on bullying. We actually had someone from the Murphy-Hesse-Toomey come and speak about the legal requirements in terms of bullying and reporting bullying. We've been working with Dan Pacho in IT to tighten up our reporting requirements. So there are categories that we're mandated to report on. One of them is how many reports of bullying were filed, and also, you know, how many of those did actually result in actual incidences of bullying. And so we're required to report on those things to the Department of Education. And so we will be coming before you and kind of presenting this whole thing. So the bullying intervention prevention plan, how we handle reports, incidences, what incidents look like, the number of incidences, and things like that. But we certainly can take a look and kind of crosswalk it between the vocal survey.
Yeah. And then the last question, I'll combine it, includes two categories in engagement and environment, which in 8th grade and 10th grade, the categories of, quote, use my ideas, teach a lesson or part of a lesson, and things that I learned are relevant to me. So all of those things I think are excellent, you know, that every student would love to know that they use their ideas, that they get sought to teach part of a lesson, or that the things that they learn are relevant. And those numbers aren't bad. They're, state average numbers. But, so my question is, there's a reason that those questions were asked, right? And is it, so what do we do to change or increase those numbers? Because I think those three categories are super important categories for self-worth for each of the students, and meaningful. So could you just walk us through a little bit about how we improve those three?
Want me to take a look? So I think from a curriculum perspective, that this is a competing tension. The amount of content that the expectation is that we cover versus the pedagogy and the instructional delivery in the classroom. But it is a curriculum issue, and this would make great discussions within the department meetings, grade level meetings, our vertical meetings, which we do have. And I think it also might depend if you surveyed kids and they identified their actual content area or their elective, where are they thinking? I'd be very interested to know where they feel that they're giving ideas, but they're not, student discourse, we're definitely promoting. Absolutely. And that's a shift that we're making. A lot of teachers do it naturally. They offer that to their students. And then in some content areas, it may not be as natural. So, or the content is so overwhelming. So that's definitely discussions we should have in the curriculum arena. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Lebo.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions and a couple of statements. First of all, you said that this is voluntary across the state. Do we know how many districts are doing it and who those districts are that we're comparing ourselves to?
I don't have that, I can look it up, I'm not sure. I think pretty much all of the districts do it, but how many students participate, that I don't know.
But it's voluntary for districts, not.
It is voluntary, but I do think the majority of districts do it.
And I'm not really pleased all the time to be compared to what the state does, because I think we're so much better than the state. And I'd much rather look at our trends than look at the state. So it feels a little hard for me to get my head around how we're doing, even when we do MCAS compared to the state. I know we have to do that, especially with MCAS because of the accountability data. But I'm much more interested in our trends and how we're doing and where we've made improvements, especially in do I see myself in the curriculum, because we're pushing for that so much. And if we see that trend, I'm much happier than I don't really care how we are compared to the state, honestly. But I got a few other questions. On slide 14, so under the participation one, in at least 2 of my classes, students are asked to teach a lesson or part of a lesson. I mean, I'm thinking of some classes where a student possibly couldn't do that and shouldn't be asked to do that. And why is that question in here? Is that, who's decided that all of these things are good things for kids to be doing, or that teachers should be doing? I almost would like to have somebody telling me why that particular item was chosen. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the teachers would say, no, I always ask kids to teach a lesson on the brand-new concept I'm bringing into the classroom this week. I don't know. But some of those questions just really, especially when you look at how poorly we did at grade 10, should we be having kids who are taking a content course for the first time maybe, or a unique level to be teaching something? I know we do it where we can. We have kids teaching in the vocational programs where we can, because they have mixed classes sometimes with seniors teaching younger students, but I just don't know that this is all that valuable. And I hate to see it brought to us as an area of improvement unless I heard from our staff that it's really important. And I could be wrong, so I'm sorry. It's just these kind of things that bug me about these surveys. They really, really does. On the page 16, I think it was. Oh, no, never mind. Physical safety. My one question about physical safety was, in the survey, we saw questions about weapons, but they don't consider that an area of concern?
We pulled out our area, what we thought were our areas of concern. So we looked at things pretty much, if it was a strength, it was pretty much somewhere around 70 or above. Because you have in front of you, you have the
Right.
list of all of literally everything that we have. You have.
But we didn't have it before this meeting either. We
Yeah.
probably should have had this before
Yeah.
the meeting, because I would have felt more comfortable. having seen that, but still, I don't care if we haven't seen a 70 index on weapons. If we've seen a 30 index on weapons, I'm concerned.
Yeah, it was not, I don't think it
But
was.
you know
the
what I
same.
mean?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, those are the kind of topics that I have much more interested in than some of the other ones. Not to be difficult, but I'm being big difficult. And then on slide 24, I had a question. This one is really bugs me. I'd love to see what the parents say about this. And instructional for 5th grade, when I am home, I like to learn more about the things we are learning in school. Why? Why is that important? You know, why is that important? I mean, is a 5th grade, they're learning stuff about the natural world or cooking or, I don't get it. I don't get why anybody would say we need to improve in that, because I don't know if that's that valuable in the 5th grade. I mean, most 5th grade kids bring home what they learned in school. You know, but they don't want to, let me find out more about it. They want to go out and play.
Right. It'd be a more natural correlation, I think, to the extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
And it could either be phrased as, are you looking for something unique and different to
Right.
expand your horizons, or are you looking for
Right.
something
It would give us
that
better
interests you?
data
I agree.
than this. When I am home, I like to, they probably don't even think that's a negative thing to say, you know? I don't know. That's, on the bullying thing, just, I'm really glad we're going to have a presentation on that. And I really wanted it to be more than bullying. I wanted it to be about incidents. But when we talk about bullying, remember what we said about bullying, that the principals can decide whether this was bullying or not. And that's the part that am concerned about. Because there are some schools that are reporting bullying, and there are some schools that we have seen bullying, but the principal obviously didn't think it was bullying, so it didn't get reported as such.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that concern. And so we've been actually working pretty hard with the principals this year since the start of the school year. We've discussed it in multiple principal meetings. We brought in our legal counsel to meet with our staff to go over the importance of it. And so what we do is, even if a parent or a student or a teacher, you know, what we've, asked our principals to do is, even if they say it's a conflict, even if they don't use the word bullying, we need to give them the bullying report form, do an investigation, and make a determination. And Mara actually collects all of those bullying report forms. And so, so that's what we've asked them to do. So now, when we report to the state, we're going to report the number of incidences that were reported. So, and then through the investigation, it should be determined whether or not it was bullying or not. But you will have the number of times it's been reported, and also then how many of those reports ended up being a finding of bullying. So we really have, and we continue to work on it. We're really keeping a tight eye on it, and we continue to meet with the principals because we do know that that is a concern of the committee. And so we have been really focusing on it this year.
And one more thing, Mr. Guttrow, and I'll get out of your way. I'm pleased that we sent the bullying report out to the parents. I don't know that the staff has had a chance to weigh in on it. I know the school committee has not had a chance to weigh in on it. I don't want to see a final report come to us until we have had a presentation on it, so that we are more comfortable with it. I don't think the community just means parents,
Yep,
because our
definitely.
teachers are with our kids all day long, so I really think that they should see that and have a chance to weigh in on it.
Yes.
Sorry.
Mr.
Can I
Guttrow?
just say one thing on the bullying? So I'm assuming this is the case, that there, in the curriculum, there is a presentation to students about the different types of bullying, right? At different grade levels, you might get presentations of the different types of bullying. And then I'm assuming that the principal has that same list of different types of bullying, which then the student learns about it, can report it, and that's considered a type of bullying. And you don't have to answer that right now, but I'm hopeful that when the students learn about it and potentially report it, that the principal understands that's what they're being taught, that's what they view and see as bullying, and that's what they're reporting. So they should be
Yeah.
similar, I would think.
It can be very nuanced, so,
No, I know.
so I think that sometimes is the struggle, because, there is, and we'll go over, we'll review all this with the committee, but there is definitely a definition of bullying, as you said. It's supposed to be a repeated pattern over time. It has to have like an imbalance of power. There are a whole bunch of, and we do talk about that with the kids, but I think that sometimes, in elementary schools and middle schools and even in high schools, kids have conflicts. And, it's not always just this one student doing these things to this child. Sometimes it is, but there are, and sometimes it may start between two conflicts, just a conflict between two kids. And then it becomes other kids join in. And now it's this group that's targeting this one student. So many things happen. It might have not have started off as bullying, but then it ends up being bullying. So it can be a little bit tricky. But our principals, I think, do a great job, and we continue to work with them. But yes, we do hope that we get kids comfortable with reporting, that we get all staff comfortable with reporting. So, because sometimes even, we can kind of take it for granted. You see a conflict between these two students, and you think it's just a conflict, but we really need to report like all of those things, because sometimes even if it doesn't start that way, it may end that way.
Mayor Koch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments. So, it's interesting that we are so closely aligned with the state averages on this. And obviously, that's the state average. So I'm assuming we're closely aligned with a lot of other districts. So the safety issue obviously is one that's important to me, but I also recognize that we live in a world now where everything is instant. Something happens in California, we know about it at this moment, and kids are in tune to the information. So I got to believe that some of the stuff that occurs outside of our district has an effect on that response as well. And I'm not looking for that's a response from me, but it's just an observation. The other thing is when professional polls are done, there's a margin of error. Now, these are direct responses from kids, but I also got to believe, look, we all went to school. I had siblings that hated school, didn't want to be there. One of my 3 kids didn't want to be in school, so I got to believe that they don't respond quite as productively, let me put it that way. So, and I think when you narrow that down to certain age groups, that's probably even more of a factor. I think a middle schoolers, for example. I appreciate the information. I think it's helpful. But I think we have a long way to go to truly understand some of this information. So thank you.
Mrs. Cahill?
I just have to say a couple of comments, but one question is, so given this survey after the MCAS, is that a DESE requirement, or is that something that
Yes.
because I think that's crazy, right? You're coming out of there, and then you want these kids to do this
I
survey
think most
after
of us
you're
agree
sitting
with you
there,
on that one.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that they're not taking a lot of time figuring out how to answer the questions. Also, I'm not a huge survey person because, you call this a vocal survey, but it really isn't. I think if it would be more impactful if we could sit with a kid and say, oh, so that's how you answered it, can you explain, why do you feel that way? Would get a better understanding of why they're answering the way they do. And I think to the mayor's point, 8th and 10th graders, aren't, I don't think the age group that is like gonna take this seriously, and they don't probably answer positively to most of these questions that are in the survey, like it's probably not as important to them, and they just want to get it done. And a lot of kids don't, they don't like school at that age. I'm generalizing, but I would think it's probably a harder population to get a true response from them. But I don't, and the other question I had was, as far as the questions, they seem a little bit less contradictory than they were last year. We don't put them together, DESE gives them to
Yeah,
us,
they
right?
put them together.
And I think, and to Mrs. Leopold's point, some of them really, I don't think, make much sense for our students. But when we do get this survey, so this is a spring 2022, and we look at some of these things and we want to make some adjustments, the time you have to digest this and kind of make adjustments would really be implemented more next year. Like, can we do immediate kind of adjustments to some of these responses, or?
So we get it in the fall. We don't get it until
Right,
like
that's
you're
what I mean. I know-
re-entering in
I know you don't get
school.
it till now.
Yeah, and so the principals do use it. They did use it for their school improvement plans, and we definitely look at it and use it. For sure, it's one of the we brought in open parachute. We were doing all these different things. Like I said, this is just one measure. And I agree with everything that you're saying about the questions. I mean, I think one of the things that bothers me the most is that there's a few questions in here where they switch the way the scale reads. So for every other question, a positive answer is almost always, like, this almost always happens, or this mostly happens, and then all of a sudden that becomes a negative answer.
Yeah.
And so I find, like, that is not a good way to administer surveys, to switch the, you know, the way that the students are supposed to respond to the item. So I think there's a lot of things we would probably do differently if we were developing the survey, but, yeah.
So the
But
principals get like this spring results, they get them in the beginning of the year. So when they bring us the SIPs, they have already had a chance to kind of digest it and add some strategies for the
Yep.
year. That was pretty much what my question would be, how immediate it would be. But yeah, I think, like you said, you know, it's just another sample, but, you know, I don't have I have some confidence in it, but not a lot, you know, let's put it that way. But thank you.
Mr. Pagoli?
Just briefly, I brought this up before. The state monitors the reports that we give them in terms of incidents, am I correct?
yes,
So does that preclude a principal from doing some things discipline-wise so that it doesn't look as bad for the school? I'm just
yeah.
throwing it out there.
I understand, yeah, I understand what you're asking, but, you know, I think it certainly makes principals more concerned, I would say. But I think that when it comes down to safety, you know, our schools have to be safe.
No, I agree.
And so, you know, whether that means that, you know, we might get cited for something, or, you know, if it means keeping our schools safe, we're going to go with keeping our schools safe every single time. So,
That's good to hear. I just don't like percentages used as a measuring tool. Just to break it down pretty simply, if you're 1 out of 2, you're 50%. If you're 2 out of 3, you're 67%. And I don't like the comparisons of groups using percentages, because in some instances, those groups are smaller than the other groups, which are obviously larger. So
yeah.
I think it gives a false read sometimes. And just on a personal level, I'd rather see us up in the 70s in all areas. I know that's a pie in the sky type of thing, but I think we're better than what this survey shows. I truly believe that. I think our teachers do a great job in the class. Principals are doing a great job as well. So, and it's been a difficult 2 years, obviously.
Absolutely.
So, I just view this kind of as a, okay, I'll take it for what it's worth. But I mean, I would just kind of like do an aside. I think it's poorly written. I don't know who wrote this thing and how they got paid, but I think it's
Yeah.
poorly written. It's like,
Yeah.
some of the questions, like, are you kidding me? So,
Yeah.
just a few observations from an old guy.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Mrs. Lebo?
Just very briefly, to get back to your point on safety. I know that the state has told us, I believe they've told us, that we can't suspend students. And sometimes we have to suspend students for the safety of our buildings, and then we get called on because we're suspending students. And so I think sometimes we just have to do it.
Yes.
And, you know, and I think if you just came back to us and said, yeah, we didn't do that well on that one because we had to suspend these students, we would all agree that those students probably had to be suspended.
Yeah.
So the state is really,
They tie our hands sometimes.
Be nice.
yes, so. I just wanted to point that out, that, you know, we can't do it, and if we do it, we should do it because we have, you know, 500 other kids in the building we need to keep safe at that particular moment in time. So I think we're doing our best with that sort of stuff.
Do we have the opportunity to give them feedback in their questions? You
They
may want
don't, I don't believe they've asked us.
to, they haven't asked.
In the virtual webinars, when you get a chance to ask the questions,
Yeah.
you get to learn a little bit about what their thinking is, but they've never changed anything that I can tell based on the feedback that the districts have given.
My concern is the fifth grade. You have the ability to separate by grade, by school?
Yes.
Is there a possibility for you to do a comparative study with the same criteria for the fifth graders that are not in their elementary schools compared to the fifth graders that are?
Yes.
If you can do that, I would love to see that at our next facilities meeting on January 23rd. Okay? Thank you, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you, everybody.
Superintendent, new business.
Thank you. We have a donation. The Quincy City Club recently made a donation of $2,000 to support the work of our homeless coordinator, Leslie Britson, with students and families struggling with homelessness. If I could have a motion to accept the donation, that would be greatly
On the
appreciated.
motion of Mr. Bergoli, seconded by Mrs. Lebo, we approve. Roll call? Or just a yay?
It's a voice vote.
Voice vote.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Next is a donation from Walgreens. Walgreens also recently made a donation of $2,600 to support the work of Leslie Britson with students and families
Motion to
struggling with
accept.
homelessness. If we
Second.
could-
On the motion of Mrs. Lebo, seconded by the mayor, we approved. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Next
Item
is-
D,
Next is a grant, a $100,000 grant from the Mass Higher South Shore Workforce Board to fund the Quincy Public Schools Internship and Education Initiative. 44 North Quincy and Quincy High School seniors will have paid internships in our elementary and middle schools and work as teaching assistants, tutors, and monitors. Students will have training and professional development, and this experience will hopefully assist in our goal of growing our educational workforce. If I could have a motion to accept the
on the
grant.
motion, Mr. Guttrow, seconded by Mrs. Cahill, we approve. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Next is a grant of $3,000 from the charitable gift fund of Jessica K. Davis Myers to the Quincy Public Schools Art Department to fund the creation of artwork celebrating the city of Quincy to be displayed during the city's
Motion to
400th
approve.
anniversary year.
Motion of the mayor, seconded by Mr. Bergoli, we approve. And on the motion, I just want to thank Jessica and Dan Myers for all that they do for the arts in the city. They're doing this for art teachers throughout the city, giving them, the Art Association is giving them memberships to each of the teachers as well through this grant. And they are contributing in some way to the Quincy 400 when it comes about via having our students getting involved. So thank you to Jessica and Dan Myers. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Item F, Mrs. Cahill, creating professional staff caseload guidelines.
Yes, we're just proposing to put in the policy subcommittee, reviewing and creating some caseload guidelines, make sure that our specialists and faculties, teachers, staff are compliant in their caseloads, and we have a policy in place that we can look to make sure that we're complying on across the board.
Okay, unless there's an objection, it goes to the policy subcommittee. Thank you, Mrs. Cahill. Item G, student travel out of state overnight. We have North Quincy and Quincy High School robotics.
Motion to approve.
Motion of the mayor, seconded by Mrs. Lebo. We approve. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. We have a student travel out of state overnight from Central Middle School. On a motion of
approve.
Mr. Bergoli, seconded by Mr. Guttrow, we approve. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the ayes have it.
Thank you all.
Okay, any additional business? Hearing none. Communications. We have upcoming school committee meetings on January 25, February 8th, March 8th, 20, and 22 as well, all at 6:30 here at Cottington. Upcoming subcommittee meetings are also at Cottington. We have the quarterly budget and finance on January 23rd at 6. Athletics and wellness, January 23rd at 6:15. The facilities, transportation, and security on January 23 at 6:45. And a joint special education and teaching and learning on February 15th at 6. Any reports of the subcommittee? None? I'll take a motion to go into executive session for contract negotiations, and I believe we won't be returning. Do I have that motion? On a motion of Mr. Begoli, seconded by Mrs. Lebo. Superintendent, call the roll.
Mr. Bergoli?
Yes.
Mrs. Cahill?
Yes.
Mr. Guttrow?
Yes.
Hubley, Mrs. Lebo?
Yes.
Mrs. Santoro?
Yes.
And Mayor Koch.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.